by statute, the courts are stripped of jurisdiction from overruling a presidential determination or a secretarial determination on TPS when the Secretary of Homeland Security makes that determination. So when Secretary Noem terminated TPS for the illegals that Biden flew into the country, when courts stepped in, they were violating explicit language that Congress had enacted, saying they have no jurisdiction. So it's not just the courts aren't just at war with the executive branch. The courts are at war, these radical rogue judges, with the legislative branch as well, too. So all of that will inform the choices the president ultimately makes, yes.
Now, why is Trump talking about suspending habeas corpus? You think that's something he's eager to do? I don't think so. I think it's part of the fight he's waging to save the existential fight for America against the unelected black robe tyrannical inferior federal district trial court judges who wish to assert greater constitutional authority over matters of immigration and national security than the Constitution has bestowed almost entirely on our elected Article 2 executive branch president. We heard Steve Miller say that Congress passed an act that stripped from the Article 3 federal courts the jurisdiction over immigration. They have no authority there. That's what the immigration courts are for. And federal courts, they imagine they have this infinite jurisdiction over all the things. They don't. They are courts of limited jurisdiction. Geographic jurisdiction is limited. The parties that can appear before them are limited. And the subject matter they may address in their role as federal judges is limited. It's only what Congress gives them jurisdiction over. And if Congress has taken jurisdiction away, then those unelected black robe tyrannical inferior federal district trial court judges simply don't have jurisdiction over those matters.
Did you know that in all 50 states, self-defense law, not gun law, but self-defense law, uses a simple 5-element test to see if your use of defensive force was legally justified? And that same test applies no matter what state you're in or what tool you use to defend yourself. If you're missing even one of those required elements, however, you've made yourself an easy conviction for an aggressive prosecutor. My name is Attorney Andrew Branca, and I've worked more than 30 years as a self-defense attorney. Every state has seemingly endless, complex pages of laws regarding self-defense, so complex that many top criminal defense attorneys rely on my expert analysis to help win self-defense cases for their clients. If the legal code is that complex for lawyers, how can a citizen gun owner expect to know or even follow the law, especially when a life or death situation has triggered a massive adrenaline-fueled mandate to make that fight or flight decision right now? It seems daunting. Yet I created a simple but powerful framework that has allowed me to serve the legal community and countless American gun owners to simplify this legal complexity into just 5 elements of self-defense law. And you can learn my 5-element legal algorithm I use to consult on and win with the top criminal defense attorneys all over the country to protect law-abiding, gun-owning citizens from making innocent legal missteps that land them in prison. Now, with a simple read or listen, you can install my 5-point legal framework so it acts as a sort of muscle memory defense to protect you from losing your rights when you choose to defend innocent human life. Click below to get the latest edition of my book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles, for free. I ask only that you help cover the shipping and handling cost to get the book to you.
All right, now let's talk about habeas corpus. And here we have Stephen Miller, who I think is fantastic, obviously a member of the Trump team, always well-spoken, very thoughtful. The commentator here notes that the U.S. has suspended habeas corpus 4 times during the Civil War, shortly after the Civil War to combat the KKK, to combat the Philippines insurrection, and in Hawaii during World War II. Nothing is happening in this country that would warrant suspending habeas corpus right now. Congress needs to reel in executive power. Of course, I would disagree with that statement. America is a nation being subject to invasion. We may have stopped the flow of people coming in, largely. There's 100 million invaders still in our nation. The purpose of suspending habeas corpus would be specifically to facilitate the deportation of these illegal criminal migrants within our borders and return them all home Everybody loves to visit home. But let's see what Stephen Miller has to say about all this.
Hold on, there's a question back there first.
I have two quick questions. First, President Trump has talked about potentially suspending habeas corpus to take care of the illegal immigration problem. When could we see that happen, do you think?
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. At the end of the day, Congress passed a body of law known as the Immigration and Nationality Act, which stripped Article 3 courts, that's the judicial branch, of jurisdiction over immigration cases. So Congress actually passed, it's called jurisdiction stripping legislation. It passed a number of laws that say that the Article 3 courts aren't even allowed to be involved in immigration cases. Many of you probably don't know this. I'll give you a good example. Are you familiar with the term temporary protected status, or TPS, right? So by statute, the courts are stripped of jurisdiction from overruling a presidential determination or a secretarial determination on TPS when the Secretary of Homeland Security makes that determination. So when Secretary Noem terminated TPS for the illegals that Biden flew into the country, when courts stepped in, they were violating explicit language that Congress had enacted, saying they have no jurisdiction. So it's not just the courts aren't just at war with the executive branch. The courts are at war, these radical rogue judges, with the legislative branch as well, too. So all of that will inform the choices the president ultimately makes, yes.
So habeas corpus suspension is on the table. He's referencing this constitutional provision, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. America is clearly in a state of invasion. We have tens of millions, I suggest 100 million, illegal migrants in our nation that need to be deported and sent back home. That is a state of invasion. Now, this is in Article 1 of the Constitution. Article 1 of the Constitution describes Congress. So one could make the argument that this would be a power of Congress, not of the president, to suspend habeas corpus. We're going to hear that argument a lot from the progressive left, of course, who do not wish President Trump to suspend habeas corpus. But you'll note the language here. It doesn't actually say that. There's another section of Congress of Article 1 that sets out the specific powers of Congress. This is not in that section. This is separate. This is simply referencing not a power of Congress, but habeas corpus, which simply means, of course, you have the body. So it's giving everybody who's detained by the government a right to demand that they be presented in front of a judge, so the government has to explain why they've been detained. That's what habeas corpus means, but it has been suspended, and it's not at all clear. In fact, history tells us that it's not a power of Congress, that the president can and has suspended habeas corpus on his own authority. Of course, the left is calling all this fascism. It doesn't get more fascist than calling habeas corpus a privilege, instead of what it really is, the absolute most basic right that we have against tyranny, going all the way back to the Magna Carta. Except, of course, that habeas corpus has been previously suspended, most famously during the Civil War by Abraham Lincoln himself. Abraham Lincoln. And there was something passed during the Civil War by Congress called the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act. It was signed March 3rd, 1863. And Lincoln did use that authority bestowed by Congress to suspend habeas corpus in a number of situations, but he didn't believe he needed Congress's permission to suspend habeas corpus because he also suspended habeas corpus on several other occasions prior to the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act of March 3rd, 1863, prior to Congress saying, we give you permission. Lincoln was suspending habeas corpus prior to having any grant of permission from Congress. For example, the first time he suspended habeas corpus was in Maryland, which was a volatile border state, and he suspended habeas corpus there so he could arrest a bunch of civilian rioters and have them tried in military courts and not have to present them in federal courts under a writ of habeas corpus. and also to prevent the movement of Confederate troops around Washington, which obviously is immediately adjacent to Maryland. And then he extended that order various times, all in the year 1861, 2 years before Congress passed the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act and Lincoln signed it into law in 1863. But that wasn't it. That wasn't the only event. Lincoln also suspended habeas corpus in 1862 to call up basically draftees for the militaries. And then in 1862, again, he suspended habeas corpus to arrest and prosecute protesters to martial law. And ironically enough, people who were protesting his suspension of habeas corpus. So on at least 3 separate occasions, and really many more because each of these was extended at various times, Lincoln, on his own authority as the Article II elected executive branch president, was suspending habeas corpus without any authority from Congress. Here's one example. This is a Lincoln proclamation signed by an adjutant general on Lincoln's authority, September 25th, 1862, again, prior to Congress passing and Lincoln signing the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act of 1863. And in this September 25th, 1862 general order, second paragraph here, that the writ of habeas corpus is suspended in respect to all persons arrested or who are now or hereafter during the rebellion shall be imprisoned in any fort, camp, arsenal, military prison, or other place of confinement. The point is, Lincoln suspended habeas corpus here too before Congress had given him any authority to do so. He was doing so on his own authority. Now, why is Trump talking about suspending habeas corpus? You think that's something he's eager to do? I don't think so. I think it's part of the fight he's waging to save the existential fight for America against the unelected black robe tyrannical inferior federal district trial court judges who wish to assert greater constitutional authority over matters of immigration and national security than the Constitution has bestowed almost entirely on our elected Article II executive branch president. I pointed this out on Twitter recently. This kind of move by Trump, hinting at suspending habeas corpus, that's what happens when the progressive left orchestrates the unelected black robe tyrannical inferior federal district trial courts to violate the separation of powers doctrine, to exceed their actual jurisdiction, which is very limited, almost zero in immigration matters. We heard Steve Miller say that Congress passed an act that stripped from the Article III federal courts the jurisdiction over immigration. They have no authority there. That's what the immigration courts are for. And federal courts, they imagine they have this infinite jurisdiction over all the things. They don't. They are courts of limited jurisdiction. Geographic jurisdiction is limited. The parties that can appear before them are limited. And the subject matter they may address in their role as federal judges is limited. It's only what Congress gives them jurisdiction over. And if Congress has taken jurisdiction away, then those unelected black robe tyrannical inferior federal district trial court judges simply don't have jurisdiction over those matters. One thing you hear thrown about a lot, and it's a term of legalese, a lot, saying, well, this is why the federal courts are allowed to issue all these injunctions to prevent Trump from deporting illegal migrants. It's the All Writs Act. The All Writs Act is an act by Congress saying that the federal courts can issue all writs, orders, in effect, all orders necessary to carry out their proper function. And that's true. And that would include temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions. But the key is the All Writs Act, it's not a creation of jurisdiction. It's saying where you have jurisdiction, you can issue all the normal orders a court would issue. Where you have proper jurisdiction. The All Writs Act does not give any federal judge the authority to issue orders outside the boundaries of his limited jurisdiction. So it's just they're tossing around these legalistic terms of art like the All Writs Act because nobody knows what that means if you're not an actual lawyer or haven't researched it. And it sounds pompous and authoritative. It is not. It is not. these judges are still vastly exceeding their proper jurisdiction. They are violating the separation of powers doctrine wildly by acting as if they have the authority to order around these unelected, black robe, tyrannical, inferior federal district trial court judges believe they have the authority to order around the elected Article 2 executive branch president, elected by the whole of the American people, the only federal official who's elected by the whole of the American people to carry out their political will, as if he were a mere clerk in their court. This hash needs to be settled. And they're still doing it because as yet there's been no consequence to them for doing it.
Thanks for watching this highlight segment of our full-length Law of Self-Defense live stream. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to give us a like and subscribe for more expert analysis on politics, law, and how to be hard to convict. And to watch the full-length episode of this show, just click right here. Stay safe.